superhero at a time.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Superhero Headquarters. I am your host, Miss Dorch, and here we are molding the superheroes of tomorrow. Today's video is going to be me reflecting on a video that I watched, a Red Table Talk video that I watched with Will Smith the other day. I feel like this Red Table Talk really honed in and showed evidence of the true connection between reading standards and SEL. If you don't know what SEL is, it has been the big boom word in education. SEL is social emotional learning, so it talks about the child's development on a social emotional level and what things we need to do in the classroom in order to foster positive growth in a child's social and emotional well-being. So I'm going to play clips of the video just to show you where my light bulb kind of went off. And then I'm going to give you my reflection. Before I do that, I do want to give you some background information on this conversation that they're having, just because I know that you all didn't hear it before I did it. So, yeah. So in this Red Table Talk, Will brung himself to the table with a psychologist, and they talked about the discourse that he had with Janet, who Janet is the lady that played Aunt Viv on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Apparently, some years ago, they had a very public discourse, which led to her leaving the show. And they hadn't spoken in years, 20 plus years. And they finally had a chance to sit down and talk about the things that transpired throughout those years and what ultimately led to the demise of their relationship. And so Will was sitting down with the psychologist, and they were just going back and forth about the parts of the conversation and different things that he did to kind of foster a positive outcome of the conversation. And so while they were doing this and while I was listening, as I said, a light bulb went off in my head and was like, hey, that sounds like a reading standard. Hey, I taught that in class. Hey, kids really need that. So I just wanted to bring that to you all because I don't know if anyone else will hear that while they're listening. But I really feel like it's important to provide the most authentic instruction to children. And I feel like this conversation here truly shows that while we look at standards on a basic front line, they can be translated throughout a child's entire life. So without further ado, I'm going to play the first part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a part. I'm going to tell you what I connected, play another part. There's only 3 parts, so I'm going to show you how I connected and then bring it all back together. So let's go.
Childhood wounds, it's that they weren't listened to.
Absolutely.
You got to this place where you could listen, a 30-year journey to where you could finally listen. You be the psychologist for a minute. What do you think are the 3 most important parts of listening?
I think the major part is let them complete their story. No debate. There's no D in love.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
No debate. No. You're just going to listen thoroughly to what their story is. It seems really simple, but it's huge. You've got to ask questions about the other person's story. I would say that's number 1. And
okay. So I'm going to stop right there because then he's going to move into something else that I want to connect. So I'm going to speak on what he said. So if you noticed, the psychologist asked him what was something that he felt like was very important, when he's in those type of conversations. And for me, when I was growing up, granted, I'm not that old, but when I was growing up in elementary school, we had speaking and listening skills. As a 2nd grade teacher, I don't know if at some districts they still do it or in some places they do. I know that for me, my children don't get a speaking and a listening grade. which will kind of go hand in hand to why some of these children have trouble listening and just speaking. But I digress. Back to the conversation at hand. But he said something that was very essential. He said, first, I'm going to listen to understand. And if you're a reading teacher, especially if you use iReady, this is such a big thing. Teaching children to first read to understand. Nothing else. If they're doing nothing else, they're just reading to understand the basic parts of the story. Okay. And then after they have read the story in its entirety and they feel like they have understood what it is that has been written, they can go back and ask and answer questions. And if you heard him, he said, first, I'm going to listen to understand, and then I'm going to ask questions based on what it is that I heard. And if you're a teacher, you know this. RI 2.1 and RI 2 and RL 2.1 both talk about asking and answering questions, teaching children to read a story and then being able to say, okay, this is what I read. Now, what questions can be answered based off what I read? And what questions can I ask based off the story in order to gain clarity of what I read? And so the fact that he takes that skill and uses it in a social setting shows us that while for us it may look like a basic reading standard when we're teaching it, it's something that we can show our children can be translated in their life. Because if I put you in a situation and you show me that the minute I say something that you want to refute, you speak, it shows me that you didn't listen to understand. You listened to respond. And I feel like that's a big issue, especially with children and adults. They listen to respond rather to understand. And lack of understanding leads to discourse. So this was the first thing I wanted to pinpoint. I'm going to press play again so that we can get to the second part of it.
The thing that Jada and I have that is really magical is after they tell you the story, it's still not your turn, repeat it back.
That's fantastic. Yes.
And then validate the part that's true. Wow, that must feel terrible. I understand.
And it's just real.
Okay. So the second thing that he said, just to reiterate, is that then he repeats the story back. So whenever there's a discourse or he's being told something, first he listens to understand, he asks questions to clarify, and then he repeats back what he heard to gain further understanding of the situation. Now, in reading, we call this recounting or retelling stories, where we have a child read a story and then we're asking them to pick out what's important to create a summary and then give us the events back. Okay? Recounting the story for us, telling us the story over again. And for Will, he used this as a strategy when trying to solve issues with people, because he noticed that if he can recount to them, if he can tell them again what they said, then that will allow him to see that he's gained understanding. Because if I can repeat something back to you and you say, yes, that's what I said, then that lets you know that we're both on the same page, that what I said and what you said means the same thing. So then I can respond. And again, this is a basic reading skill that we teach children. We teach children to read stories, to recount them. Tell me what it is that you've read. And in doing that, I feel like what's really important for me to pinpoint is that when we teach children to recount stories, we don't teach them to tell you the color of the shirt, to tell you the color of the shoe, or the little minor details. We teach them to pick out the key details, the important components that ultimately lead to another event. We teach them to pick out the key details. In my classroom, I tell them, whenever we're recounting stories, I don't want to know the little small things. I need to know what happened that led to this happening? Everything has to be connected. And in Will's situation, when he recounts the story or tells the story back, he validates the important part. He say, okay, this is what you said. I understood this. I can validate that. And so again, here's another reading standard that can be translated into a social setting, which is very important for children. So I'm going to press play again so we can get to the last part and then wrap it all up.
Really about never gaslighting someone else's story. Their story's their story. It's real. It's serving a function for them. Let them have it. Yeah. Let them share it. You can receive it. Yeah. It's not a threat to you. And if it is a threat to you, then you need to go do you and get your house in order.
Exactly. That is so real.
I'm actually about to say something very idiotic. I was going to say, are you familiar with Muhammad Ali? Of course you are. Sorry about that. I have to do this with my patients. And I was like, you're familiar with Muhammad Ali? Okay, you're familiar with Muhammad Ali.
Girl, you have no idea.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, you are, sir. So he knew how to take a punch.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you did with Janet was you took psychological punches, one after the other. Okay? And that capacity was something Ali had to cultivate, right? Yep. Lean back on the ropes. And in some ways that would exhaust his opponent. But in this case, it helped her release her pain. Yep. But we know how Ali trained. I need to know how Will Smith trained to learn how to take a psychological punch.
So the first thing is recognizing that the perception of it as a punch is not real.
Okay, good for you. Because that's already, you already got a PhD right there. Right, yeah. Like, that's big. Like,
what's actually happening is someone you care about is hurt, and they're trying to figure out how to feel better. A person has been injured, and they're desperately seeking some hint of loving kindness, right? So there was no punching actually happening.
Okay, good for you.
And the second part is the recognition that it's not my turn yet.
Right.
This is Janet's turn.
That's the hard part for people, because Janet asks you why. She asked you for your why. And instead of using that as an opening to talk about, I was a kid, I was this, I was that, whatever, you didn't do that. You sent it back to her. I'm holding space here for you. I want you to share. I want to hear from you. I want to understand.
I've learned through marriage counseling, through parenting, through thousands of hours of therapy, the other person always goes first, right? Okay. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I made my little phrase, love is LUV. Listen, understand, validate the parts that you agree with. You're dead. If you try to go first when someone's in an emotional space. So I have trained myself, and I have the firm belief that you have to be able to withstand someone else's truth.
That's the punch.
Yes, absolutely.
And the key there is that when you can hold space and bear witness, to less hurt people are going back out into the world and less likely to do more damage themselves.
Absolutely.
That right there was everything.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay. So in the last thing of what he said, it really kind of goes into, I really inferred for this standard, I guess. But he said, understanding the person's truth. And for me, I translate that into knowing that that is that person's perspective of what you did or what happened. That is their perspective. That is how they view the situation. Not saying that you're wrong and they're right, but saying or recognizing that they had you all had two different perspectives of what happened. You may have been in the same situation, but you all viewed it two completely different ways. And because of the way you all viewed it, that translated into how that person reacted. Okay. And so for me, light bulb again went off and said, okay, Well, this goes back to my standard of when I teach, actually two standards. When I teach children to identify a character's point of view in a story, and then when I teach them that perspectives lead to reactions, how a character perceives something helps them or is the reason they acted the way that they did. And so again, it was crazy to me how he used something that we teach in reading, whether or not he learned it in reading or not, I'm not sure. But he used something that we teach in reading in a social setting. He wasn't reading a book. He didn't read a book. He took something, he learned these things. However, they are things that we teach children in reading. We teach children, okay, when we're reading a story, if we got John and we got Sally, John and Sally can see it two different ways. If Mama was buying a pet and Sally is really afraid of pets and Johnny loves pets, they're going to have two different perspectives about this same thing. Sally's going to be like, oh, no, I don't want a pet. I don't like animals. But that is her perspective, where she may think it's a bad thing. That's not right or wrong. It's her perspective. She owns that. Validate that she feels that way because that's what she feels. Now, you, on the other hand, may like it because you haven't had a negative experience, okay? So again, your perspective is not wrong. Their perspective is not wrong. It's clearly, well, their viewpoint, that you all just have two completely different perspectives that may have come from prior experiences. And because you all have two different perspectives, that's going to lead to a different reaction from each person. One person may be ecstatic, the other person may be sad. Okay, and it all ties back to how we perceive things. And for me, this is a very big thing because I feel like perspectives or understanding that everyone can have a different perspective is the reason, or the fact that a lot of people don't understand it is the reason that we have so much discourse in the world, because we feel like everyone should view something the way that I view it. The way that I see it is the way that you should see it. There's no in between or gray area. And that's not reality. The reality is everybody has their own views on everything in the world. We have people in this world that think Apple is better than Android. Something so simple. We all don't look at things the same way. But being able to recognize that, okay, when I'm in a situation, I can understand that while some parts of what they said may be valid and I may be wrong, that does not tell me that my feelings are not valid, because how I perceive the situation at that particular moment validated my feelings. My perspective validated my feelings. So my perspective or how I view something is not wrong because that's mine. You can't tell me not to view something in a certain way. Okay, now your viewpoint or the way that you express your viewpoint can alter my viewpoint in that space. However, that does not mean that the way I view it is right or wrong, because you can't tell someone how to view something. So I feel like teaching children that, okay, yes, we're learning this in literature, but I want you to understand that whenever you're in a situation, and in my class, we have social emotional SEL Wednesdays, where we do kind of tie what we learn to different real world situations, just so that I can show them that, hey, what we're learning right now is connected to life. And I kind of try to use acting a little bit, but being able to show children that, okay, when you're in a situation, when you and your friends don't agree, or you're arguing about something, understand that what that person feels is valid because it's their perspective. It's what they feel, okay? Now, granted, you may not have meant to make them feel that way. That was not your perspective, or that wasn't how you viewed the situation, or that wasn't the intended outcome that you wanted. But from their perspective, that is how they feel. And so always in my classroom, whenever I discipline students, I say, I understand that you feel like what I'm doing is wrong, that from your perspective, you did nothing wrong. However, from my perspective, that's something that we do not do. And so we have a conversation about that so that they can understand why I'm viewing what they're doing that way. And then I can understand why they took the actions that they took so that we can find a common ground and be able to solve the situation. So again, he took all of these things and now he has a strategy for dealing with problems in life. And if we can translate the things that the concrete skills that we teach them to apply to literature in their real lives, then man, that's a game changer. Because the reality is literature is just an expression of one's thoughts. And so now that we have taught them to write down or read or understand other people's thoughts, if we can teach them to do that when it's not written, or when they just hear it and they're in the situation and they're fuming, then we have created people, or molded human beings that can problem solve. And I feel like a problem in this world is that, first, we lack people who seek understanding, and two, we lack people who know how to effectively problem solve. So that's just my little tidbit. I will link the link to this conversation down below so you all can go back and listen to it. I found it really helpful. I learned some things from the conversation. But this was just my little tidbit. You can comment below. Let me know if you agree or disagree. If you listen to it yourself and you hear some things that spark a conversation, please let me know. But yeah, thank you for listening. And Miss Dorch is out.
Come on, superhero HQ. Come on, mold the future. One superhero at a time.